I did not hear the clink of the wine glass first. I heard the laughter, bright and careless, rolling across the backyard like loose marbles until it crowded the space where I stood with a paper plate in my hand. Saturday in May had softened Macon, Georgia into something almost kind, the air warm and sweet with charcoal and cut grass, the banner that said "Happy Birthday" hanging a little crooked over the long table. Ethan was 8, wearing a paper crown and a comet of blue frosting across his cheek. I had baked the cake at dawn, washed the strawberries, set out the paper forks, and pressed the creases from the plastic tablecloth with the flat of my hand, the way habit teaches you to smooth what no one else sees. Heather raised her glass and the yard tilted toward her voice. "Oh, Eleanor is basically our free childcare. We could not survive without her." That was how she said it, like a punchline, wrapped in gratitude, the kind that makes people laugh without asking what it costs. Daniel laughed too, a small nervous sound that tried to pass for lighthearted and landed on the stone of my chest. A woman I had met twice leaned toward me and whispered, "You are so lucky to have free help," and then smiled as if she had blessed me. The wind caught the banner and it flapped once the sound like a thin hand clapping. I steadied the cake knife and told my face to be simple. I told my hands to be useful. I collected cups, lifted plates, refilled lemonade. I watched the ice catch sunlight and thought about how a thing can look bright while it melts. The grill hissed. The children shrieked. Somewhere a phone camera sounded like a tiny shutter in a museum, click after click. Proof that a family had assembled on schedule. It would look perfect later. It often did. I slid my phone from my apron pocket to check the time, and a notification blinked up from the bank, the one I almost never spoke about, the one that held the education fund I had started for Ethan 2 years after Frank died. The number shone like a small, stern lighthouse. 28,000 and change waiting in its quiet corner, tied to a promise I had made on a damp morning at the cemetery, when the grass clung to my shoes, and I had no one left to consult, but the steady voice I heard when I thought of my husband. "Do something that matters," he had always said. I locked the screen. I lifted the trash bag. I kept moving. A little later, Heather drifted to the gift table, a cloud of perfume and triumph, and brushed my arm with the kind of pat you give a reliable appliance. "We could not afford daycare," she said to a friend, not unkindly, simply loud, and then added, "See, it works out for everyone." Daniel got to the cooler first and pulled out a soda for himself and none for me. It was so small I almost missed it. I have learned not to argue with small things. They multiply when you do. Ethan chased a balloon. Grace clapped. The neighbor with the loud laugh asked if I minded staying late to clean since I was here anyway. It was meant as a joke. It landed like a receipt. The cake candles sputtered and went out, and the room we had made of sunlight and folding chairs filled with smoke that smelled like sugar and thyme. I cut generous slices. I thanked people for coming. I wiped sticky hands and cheeks with damp towels and told children to mind their shoes. I watched Daniel throw an arm around Heather and kiss the top of her head, and I felt something inside me try to rise and then choose not to. It is not that I do not know how to speak. I taught other people's children how to find their voices for 30 years. It is that sometimes silence is the only sentence that does not get misquoted later. Still, when another envelope slid across the table toward me when Heather said, "Could you grab this for me, please?" And it turned out to be the party bill someone had forgotten to pay before the restaurant closed, $780 for balloons and catering and a custom banner that could not hang straight. I looked at the total and smiled the way you smile at a stranger you once knew. I paid it. I folded the receipt into my pocket like a note to my future self. It will not always be this way. As twilight settled, the stories grew louder and looser. Someone told the one about how Heather had landed a designer discount on a bag that cost more than a month of groceries. Someone told the one about Daniel's bonus and their spring trip to Tybee Island and how the sand squeaked underfoot. Someone told the one about me how I loved being useful, how I would go crazy without them, how lucky I was to have a purpose, I carried the trash to the curb and stood for a moment by the hydrangeas, their heads bowed like they were listening to something I could not hear. The sky bruised purple. The air cooled. I could feel the shape of my life pressing back into me, the daily routes, the lists, the careful economies. No one thanked because no one saw the ledger. I looked through the kitchen window and caught my reflection in the dark glass, a woman holding a stack of paper plates like a shield, and behind that reflection, a family framed in good light. For a second, I could not tell which one was true. Then Ethan spotted me and waved so hard his crown tilted, and that small, honest wave found its way through the noise and the jokes and the easy use of my name. I waved back. I took off my apron. I put my phone on silent. I rinsed the knife and tucked it into the drawer where it belonged. The yard emptied. The last car door slammed, the ice turned to water, and the banner sagged as if it knew it had done all it could. That night, when the laughter faded and silence took its place, something inside me finally cracked. Morning starts before the light finds the blinds. 6:30. The coffee pot gurgles the smell rising through the small kitchen like memory itself. By the time the first thin sun touches the counter, I have already laid out 2 lunch boxes, cut the crusts from sandwiches, and written Ethan's name in neat letters on his water bottle, because Heather says his handwriting looks messy when I let him do it. 7 o'clock. The sound of small feet, the soft slap of socks across the tile, and Grace's voice calling Grandma are the only parts of the day that still sound like love. I make pancakes shaped like hearts, even though she eats only half. Ethan talks about a science project, something with magnets, and I nod and remind him to check his bag. The clock moves forward, quiet and certain. By 8, we are out the door, the Georgia heat already building like a promise. The car smells of crayons and sunscreen. The radio hums with news I no longer listen to. I stop at the red light by the old oak and watch the same dog walker I see every morning. There is comfort in pattern. It is the only rhythm that does not ask permission. At the school drop-off, I wave longer than they notice a small habit that belongs to me alone. Back home, the silence waits on the porch. I pour another cup of coffee and sit at the kitchen table that still has a scratch from Frank's toolbox. The ring from his coffee mug remains faintly etched in the wood. I keep it there on purpose. It reminds me that something once stayed long enough to leave a mark. Daniel called last night, but only to ask if I could watch the kids on Thursday because Heather had a late meeting. I said yes before I even thought to say maybe. The word no has grown heavy with rust. After breakfast, dishes are stacked and dried. I pull the small binder from the drawer under the microwave. Inside are bills, school notices, and a folded photocopy of the house deed. I once believed in paper as proof of fairness. The memory comes uninvited, a scene from 7 years ago. The living room filled with realtor voices, Heather smiling wide as the loan officer slid the papers across the table. Daniel squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Mom. We could never have done this without you. 30% down payment, $48,000 money Frank and I had saved for retirement trips that never came." I told myself it was family, not charity. Back then, Heather hugged me and said, "You are part of this home, too." It took less than 2 years for that sentence to disappear. Now my name lives only on the birthday invitations she forgets to send until the night before. Still, I keep the same binder. Some habits outlast respect. Noon arrives, and with it, the smell of the neighbor's barbecue. I eat a salad by the sink and watch dust move through the light like something trying to remember how to dance. My phone buzzes. Heather again. "Can you pick up Grace early today? She is fussy," I reply with a simple, "sure." There is no emoji for quiet resignation. 3 hours later, I am back in the car line, the asphalt shimmering. Grace climbs in, hair sticking to her cheeks, holding a sticker that says, "Good listener." I tell her I'm proud of her and mean it. Back home, she falls asleep on the couch before I can read her the story she picked. I cover her with the soft blanket Frank once used during his chemo. It still smells faintly of detergent in hospital hallways. The hum of the refrigerator fills the room. I should rest, but instead I fold laundry that is not mine sort socks that never match, wipe a counter that will be sticky again by morning. There is something both numbing and sacred about tending to what others abandon. The clock says 6 when Daniel's truck pulls up. He waves through the window but does not come in. Heather follows 5 minutes later, phone at her ear, laughter sharp. She mouths, "Thank you," before disappearing down the hall. No one asks if I have eaten. I watch the sky turn the color of cooled ashes and remember a time when family dinners meant talking instead of scrolling. By 9, the house next door is full of light and noise, a television laugh track spilling through the windows. I sit on my porch and sip cold coffee counting fireflies. Each one feels like a tiny pulse of endurance. Somewhere in the middle of that stillness, I think about what I have become to them. Not mother, not guest, not even burden. Just background, dependable, and quiet. A function more than a feeling. And yet under that stillness, something different has started to hum, a low electric sense that silence can be repurposed. And quiet does not mean powerless. It means measured. It means deliberate. It means waiting for the right moment to remind them that kindness, too, has an invoice. When the porch light flickers, I make a note to change the bulb in the morning. I rinse my cup, turn off the kitchen light, and let the dark fold around me like a curtain ready to rise again. The next morning started with rain, the kind of rain that softens edges and makes every sound seem polite. I sat by the window, the coffee steaming in my hands, watching drops race each other down the glass. On the counter, my phone vibrated twice. A notification from Facebook. Heather had posted a story, a picture of Ethan and Grace sitting at the kitchen table with crayons, their faces bright with morning light. The caption read, "Thanks to our free childcare for keeping these two entertained while we hustle." A laughing emoji followed golden and smug. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The picture was my kitchen, my mug half visible on the counter, my handwriting on the note stuck to the fridge that said, "Remember lunchboxes." I had never agreed to be content for someone else's performance. I put the phone face down and breathed until my heartbeat stopped echoing in my ears. When Daniel called that afternoon, his voice carried the casual tone of someone who had not yet checked his wife's story. "Mom," he said, "Heather said you seemed quiet lately. Everything okay?" I wanted to tell him that quiet was not the same as fine, that silence can be a scream when no one listens, but I only said I am tired. He chuckled. "You are doing too much again." "She was just joking, Mom. You know Heather." I smiled into the phone, though he could not see it. "When a joke hurts, it is not funny anymore," I said. There was a pause, then the sound of papers rustling, his world moving on, while mine stood still. Later that day, Heather dropped by to pick up Grace's forgotten lunchbox. She stood in the doorway, sunglasses perched, high hair perfectly framed like a magazine cover. She smelled of something expensive and temporary. "Thanks again," she said, "you are a lifesaver." The words hung in the air, brittle, as dry leaves. Before I could answer, she added, "I told everyone at brunch, you are like a full-time nanny without the paycheck. They thought it was hilarious." Her laughter was bright and hollow. I nodded and handed her the lunchbox. Inside, Grace had drawn a stick figure of us, holding hands under a crooked sun. For a second, I wanted to show her to remind her of the small kindness still alive in her daughter, but Heather was already turning away, phone in hand, another story ready to post. That evening, I made chicken soup for the kids and left it in a covered pot on their porch. Daniel texted a heart emoji. Heather replied with a photo of her takeout sushi and the caption, "Sometimes mom food just hits different." She tagged me again. By 9, I had turned off every notification. The silence was a mercy. Still, the echo of their laughter found me in the dark. I sat in the living room where Frank's portrait hung above the mantel, his eyes steady, even in shadow. The silver frame caught the moonlight and threw it back across the room, a pale stripe on the floor, like a doorway to another time. I spoke softly the way you do, when you are not sure if anyone is listening. You would have liked Grace. She has your patience. Ethan has your stubbornness. Daniel has your pride. I paused. And Heather, well, she has a talent for pretending. I traced the rim of my cup, the ceramic warm against my fingertips. Do you remember when we used to say respect was the cheapest gift anyone could give? Turns out it is the rarest too. The wind moved through the house in long sighs. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and then quieted. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere deep in the walls, the pipes clicked as if marking time. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of the house fill the space where conversation used to live. When Daniel was small, he once said that he liked the sound of my voice reading bedtime stories because it made everything feel safe. I wondered now if he remembered that, or if safety had become something he expected without noticing. The next morning, Heather's laughter drifted through the fence as she chatted with a friend about her latest post going viral among her circle. I heard my name again turned into decoration. It no longer burned. It settled. Something inside me began to cool and sharpen like metal, realizing it was always meant to be a blade. At lunch, I met an old colleague, Marianne, from the high school where I used to teach. We sat by the window of a diner with chipped cups and good pie. She asked how retirement was treating me. I almost said peaceful, but the word stuck. Instead, I said busy. She smiled. You always liked keeping busy. I nodded, though the truth was that busyness had become a cage, built politely by other people's needs. When I got home, Heather's car was parked in my driveway, not hers. She was inside, rummaging through the pantry. We ran out of juice boxes, she said, without looking up. I took a deep breath, steady as prayer. There is a grocery store 2 miles away, I said. She blinked, surprised, then smiled that same social smile, the one that never reached her eyes. Oh, come on, Eleanor, you know I am just teasing. You are like family. I wanted to say family does not take without asking, but I only said I know what family is. That night, I sat again by the window. The moon, a thin coin above the trees. I thought of Frank, of how he used to say that peace was not the absence of noise, but the presence of fairness. I understood now. Peace is not silence. It is boundaries. Thursday arrived dressed in ordinary sunlight, the kind that fools you into thinking nothing bad can happen under it. I was in the kitchen rinsing apples when Heather walked in, holding a stack of papers clipped neatly together. Her perfume announced her before her words did. Hey, Eleanor, can you sign something real quick? She said, her voice sugar over ice. It is just for Ethan's education fund, a small update the bank needs for the new school term. She placed the papers on the counter beside the fruit bowl and handed me a pen with a gold clip. I dried my hands and took the first page. The heading read, Education Fund Authorization, the font heavy and official. I skimmed down the lines, my eyes catching phrases I knew by heart from when I opened the account 3 years ago after Frank passed. Beneficiary name guardian, access withdrawal consent. But there, near the bottom, the wording had changed. Transfer of administrative control to Heather Drake, effective immediately. My chest tightened, as if the air had learned to lie. Heather was leaning against the counter, scrolling her phone, smiling like someone waiting for applause. You trust me, don't you? She said without looking up. The question hung in the air like a blade dressed as a ribbon. I looked at her. Really looked. Her nails perfect, her phone case gleaming, her reflection caught in the stainless steel fridge door, smiling back at itself. I smiled too, the kind that hides teeth. Of course I trust you, I said, and signed nothing. She took that as agreement, slid the papers back into her folder, and kissed the air near my cheek. You are the best, Eleanor, truly. She left the room humming. I stood there listening to the echo of her footsteps fade, the ticking clock suddenly too loud. I poured myself a glass of water, took one sip, and set it down untouched. Trust, I thought, is just a contract with no witnesses. That evening the house was empty, except for the faint creak of the porch swing and the smell of rain that had not yet arrived. I turned on the lamp beside the old desk, the one Frank built from oak planks the year Daniel started college. My laptop blinked awake, the login screen asking for a password that still carried his name. Frank Memorial Education Fund. I typed it slowly, each keystroke deliberate. The numbers appeared steady and unblinking. $28,411.19. I scrolled to the Management tab. Heather's name sat under Pending Authorization, a soft gray line that wanted my approval. For a moment, I just stared, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room like a nervous heartbeat. I thought about every morning I had packed Ethan's lunch, every evening I had rocked Grace to sleep while their parents chased bonuses and weekends away. Love had become labor measured in hours no one counted. I clicked Deny Authorization. Then I went further. I selected Transfer of Control and typed my own name back into the field. A new prompt appeared asking for reason. I wrote Ownership Restoration. Finally, I toggled the account to hold withdrawals until further notice. The confirmation screen flashed green, change successful. I exhaled slow and careful. For the first time in months, the quiet around me did not feel heavy. It felt earned. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon, low and distant. I closed the laptop, poured another coffee, and watched lightning bloom in the distance, like the opening of an idea. It was not vengeance, not yet. It was correction. The next morning, Heather dropped by again, cheerful as if nothing had shifted. She brought a box of cookies from the local bakery, the kind with icing shaped like apples, a peace offering dressed in sugar. "Just wanted to say thanks for signing those papers," she chirped. I smiled. "Of course. Did everything go through all right?" She nodded, distracted by another text, her fingers tapping. "Totally," she said. "The email confirmation should have hit your inbox, too." She looked up, then curious. Maybe testing. I kept my face calm. "Oh, I will check later," I said, my voice smooth as the countertop. She grinned, oblivious. "Perfect. You are a gem, Eleanor." After she left, I sat down and opened my email. There it was. A message from the fund titled, "Security Alert. Administrative change detected. If this action was not initiated by you, please review immediately." I clicked the small gray arrow beside details and saw another note beneath it, one line that made me smile without meaning to. Notification copy sent to authorized contact, Heather Drake. So the system had spoken. Heather would soon receive an email too, so a polite notice that her request for control had been denied and that all account activity was now locked, pending the owner's verification. I imagined her face when she read it, the practiced calm, cracking for just a second, the smile she wore like armor, starting to slip. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking softly. The rain arrived at last, a steady rhythm against the windows. Somewhere in that sound was a kind of music, the quiet victory of being underestimated one time too many. I made myself another cup of coffee, strong and simple, and raised it slightly toward Frank's photograph on the shelf. "You taught me to double-check everything I said softly." His eyes caught in the photograph seemed to agree. The next few weeks unfolded with the kind of politeness that hides rot beneath perfume. Heather and Daniel's house glowed with new brightness, fresh flowers by the window, new curtains that shimmered when the air conditioner kicked on. I began to notice the small shifts first. Heather's laughter got louder, her hugs more performative, the kind of affection that waits for an audience. One Saturday, she came to the porch carrying a shopping bag the color of envy, embossed with gold letters from an Atlanta boutique. She set it on the table like an announcement. "Look what Daniel got me. His bonus came through. Isn't it beautiful?" She lifted the purse as if unveiling a trophy, its leather gleaming under the morning sun. I smiled and nodded. "It really is," I said. She turned the purse to show off the clasp, an emblem shaped like a swan. "Limited edition," she added, her voice almost reverent. I looked at her wrist as she adjusted the strap and saw the faint mark from where a store sticker had been peeled too quickly. My mind wandered to the fund account, the one that held $28,000 and changed the same week. An unexplained withdrawal of $4,000 had flashed across the ledger. I remembered it because I had written the number down in the small blue notebook I kept tucked under the kitchen drawer. I kept notes now, not out of suspicion, but for clarity. Receipts had a way of speaking louder than apologies. Over the next days, new packages appeared on their porch. Designer boxes, shoes, and soft tissue perfume bottles lined up like soldiers in glass. Heather glowed with the satisfaction of display. Daniel seemed unaware or unwilling to question. He came home late, kissed her cheek, and said she deserved nice things. Love can blind, but it can also tranquilize. I said little. I cooked dinners, folded the children's laundry, and watched. Every evening after the dishes were done, I sat by the lamp and updated my ledger. Date item, estimated cost. A quiet accounting of behavior. Heather's tone toward me softened in public but sharpened in private. She thanked me too often the way people do when gratitude is camouflage. One evening while I was helping Grace with her reading, Heather leaned in the doorway and said, "You really are a blessing, Eleanor. Most women your age would have moved to Florida by now." I smiled. "Most women my age have learned to watch the weather," I replied. She laughed, not catching the meaning. The air between us carried the faint tension of an approaching storm. That night, Daniel came over with a 6-pack of beer, his version of peacekeeping. "Mom," he said, "Heather is worried you feel unappreciated. You know she means well." I nodded. Daniel's sometimes good intentions arrive wearing expensive shoes. He looked confused, scratched the back of his neck, and changed the subject. After he left, I sat on the porch and listened to the crickets. The air was thick electric waiting, a quiet storm gathering its patience. The next morning, Heather posted a picture online, a selfie with the caption, "Sunday brunch with my favorite people." In the corner of the photo, I could see the edge of the new purse and the school fundraising flyer I had given Ethan lying on the table under her elbow. The fundraiser was for art supplies. The goal was $300. Heather had not donated. She had told me art was not practical. When Grace showed me her drawing of our family later that day, she had drawn herself, Ethan, and me. Heather was not in the picture. Daniel was holding a briefcase with a question mark inside. I asked her why, and Grace said, "Daddy always looks busy. Out of the mouths of children comes truth polished clean." That evening, I opened the fund account again. The numbers remained steady, my hold still active, but a new alert blinked faintly in the corner of the screen. An attempted access had been logged 2 days ago from a different device. The system had blocked it automatically. I closed the laptop slowly, the hum of the ceiling fan matching my pulse. I wrote the date and time in my blue notebook. Heather's face floated in my mind, her easy smile, her certainty that I would never notice. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the first fireflies of summer began to blink over the yard. I watched them pulse in rhythm, quiet and patient, lighting up only when necessary. The Saturday of the barbecue arrived bright and loud. By noon, the backyard next door was dressed for a parade. Balloons in coral and gold bobbed against the fence, the grill hissed like applause, and a long table sagged under platters of ribs and corn. I had baked 2 pies, peach and pecan, because Heather asked in that way that sounded like a compliment, but was not. "You make them better than anyone, Eleanor. Everyone expects them." The phrase, "everyone expects," carried the weight of obligation disguised as pride. I arrived on time, apron folded in my hands, the air thick with summer heat, and the smell of lighter fluid. Neighbors milled about with paper cups and practiced laughter. Daniel waved from the grill, his smile as steady as a politician's. Heather floated between guests, her sundress a shade too bright, her energy rehearsed. She was at her best when performing. I set the pies on the dessert table and stepped back. A breeze lifted the napkins and carried laughter across the yard like a spark looking for tinder. Heather's voice rose above the noise. She was talking to the new couple from 2 houses down, the ones with the perfect lawn and the louder children. Her tone was playful, but sharp enough to cut. "My free childcare even brings her own groceries," she said, her hand gesturing toward me as if presenting an exhibit. The group laughed, Daniel included. For a second, I felt the same stillness I had felt the day of Ethan's birthday. That thin silence between insult and understanding. The sound of a heart deciding whether to break or beat harder. I looked at her. Really looked. The flawless skin, the expensive sunglasses, the phone tucked in her back pocket, recording pieces of a life that looked enviable to strangers. Something inside me shifted from ache to clarity. I set the plate I was holding on the table with careful precision. The sound of porcelain meeting wood was soft but final. I smiled. "I am glad you said that, Heather. It makes what is coming much easier." The laughter faltered. Conversation stumbled mid-word. A child dropped a plastic cup and the splash of juice filled the pause. Heather blinked, still smiling but with edges showing. "Oh, come on, Eleanor," she said, half laugh, half warning. "You know I am teasing." I kept my voice level the way I used to speak to students when the lesson was about to turn. Sometimes teasing tells the truth too clearly. Daniel looked up from the grill, sensing the shift. "What's going on?" I turned to him, still calm. "Nothing, dear. Just a reminder that every kindness has an expiration date." The air changed temperature. Even the smoke from the grill seemed to hang motionless, waiting. I picked up my bag, adjusted the strap on my shoulder, and walked toward the gate. Behind me, someone called my name, but I did not turn. The cicadas were screaming in the trees, louder than the whispers rising behind me. The world looked exactly the same and entirely different. At home, the quiet greeted me like an old ally. I took off my shoes, poured a glass of iced tea, and sat at the small desk by the window. The laptop waited its screen reflecting a woman who no longer flinched at small cruelties. I opened my email, typed St. Mary's Academy in the search bar, and found the contact for the finance office. The message came easily, clean, and polite. "Dear Ms. Larson, please note that as of today, the Frank Memorial Education Fund will suspend tuition payments for Ethan Drake until further notice. Do not authorize any third-party withdrawals or alternate arrangements. Thank you for your understanding. Best regards, Eleanor Drake." I CC'd the finance office and clicked send. The whoosh of the email leaving felt like air releasing from a wound. I closed the laptop and sat back, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space. Outside, the sky began to bruise with evening. Across the fence, I could still hear the faint echo of the party. Music playing, laughter returning in cautious waves, the kind that sounds almost forced. I pictured Heather realizing her joke had lost its audience. I poured another glass of tea and added a slice of lemon, the sour smell cutting through the heat. Around 8, the fireworks began, small store, bought bursts of color, rising above the rooftops. The reflection flickered across the photo of Frank on the mantel. "You would have liked this," I murmured. "Not the noise, but the precision. Timing is everything." By 9, the party was winding down. Cars pulled away, doors slammed, the familiar rhythm of people retreating from their own noise. I stepped onto the porch, the wood cool under my bare feet. Across the yard, Heather was gathering plates, her movements brisk and tight. Daniel stood beside her, trying to say something. Their words were carried away by the wind. For the first time, I did not feel small watching them. I felt measured. I thought about the email sitting in Ms. Larson's inbox about the chain reaction that would begin when business hours resumed Monday morning. The freeze on the fund. The payment overdue notice, the confusion that would follow. I imagined Heather checking her account, frowning at the balance that refused to move, her voice rising, her calm dissolving. I did not smile yet. There was no satisfaction in cruelty, only in consequence. I went back inside and turned off the lights. The moonlight through the curtain painted long silver bars across the floor like a quiet applause. The clock on the wall ticked steady, marking the space between before and after. I climbed into bed, the sheets cool against my skin, and listened to the fading echoes of the last guests leaving. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm went off and then stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt deliberate. That night, her smile finally broke. Monday morning unfolded like any other, quiet and unhurried. The scent of coffee filled the kitchen sunlight, crawling across the counter as I buttered toast for the children. From next door, I heard the faint hum of Heather's blender, her morning ritual of noise and vanity. The mail truck stopped at the curb right on time. Through the window, I saw the carrier slip a stack of envelopes into their box, one of them white and crisp with the distinct blue crest of St. Mary's Academy stamped in the corner. It was a small detail, but my heart caught on it like a thread. 10 minutes later, I heard the front door slam. Heather's heels clicked against the tile as she rifled through the pile, humming until she reached the letter. Then silence, the kind of silence that spreads like smoke. Daniel appeared behind her, still buttoning his shirt. "What's that?" Heather's voice broke on the first syllable. "It's from the school." She tore the envelope open, her hands trembling just enough to betray the confidence she had worn all weekend. Her eyes moved across the page, confusion first, then disbelief, then panic. "What do you mean, tuition payment, overdue, termination pending?" Daniel frowned, stepping closer. "That can't be right. Mom handles the payments." He looked at me. Then eyes narrowed, not in anger, yet but in the desperate search for logic. Did something change with the tuition payment? The room felt smaller, the air pressed tight around us. I set my cup down and met his gaze calmly. "Yes, Daniel." I stopped paying for people who forgot respect. The words landed softly, but their weight filled every corner of the room. Heather's mouth fell open. "You what?" Her voice cracked. "You can't just decide that." I folded the dish rag and placed it neatly by the sink. Apparently, I can. The children sat at the table, silent witnesses. Ethan's fork hovered mid-air, his cereal soggy. Grace's wide eyes darted between faces like she was watching a play without knowing the ending. Daniel rubbed his temples, pacing. "Mom, you could have at least talked to me first." I raised an eyebrow. "Like the way you talked to me before calling me free childcare in front of half the neighborhood." His lips parted, but no words came out. Heather started typing furiously on her phone, muttering about calling the school. Grace tugged gently at my sleeve, her voice small but clear. "Mommy bought new bags with school money." The sentence dropped into the room like thunder. Heather froze. Daniel's head snapped toward her, confusion carving lines across his face. What did she just say? Grace looked up, innocent. "You said Grandma's money paid for your purse, Mommy. You said school money was boring, but the purse made you feel young." Daniel's jaw clenched. Heather's face drained of color. "I didn't," she stammered. "She's a child. She doesn't know what she's saying." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I stayed silent, letting the truth find its own path. Daniel turned to me, voice low. "Is that true? Did she use the fund?" I didn't need to answer. His silence became its own confirmation. He stormed toward the living room, phone in hand, calling the bank, his tone clipped and sharp. Heather followed, pleading, her voice cracking into frantic whispers. The children looked at me. I smiled softly, trying to replace tension with steadiness. "It's okay," I said quietly. "Eat your breakfast." The sound of Daniel's voice drifted from the other room. "You authorized a transfer on the 3rd. Heather's response came broken. "I thought it was allowed. You told me she wouldn't notice." Daniel's voice rose, then stopped. The pause that followed felt like the end of something old and the beginning of something honest. I cleared the table, rinsing dishes under the running water. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Daniel stood in the doorway, the letter still in his hand. "Mom," he said softer this time. "What are we supposed to do now?" I dried my hands and turned to face him. "You are supposed to remember that respect is a form of payment, too." He looked down at the letter again, the paper shaking slightly. Heather sank into a chair, mascara-smudged fingers clenched around her phone like it could still save her. The children slipped quietly from the room, sensing that adults were finally learning something real. The rest of the morning unfolded in fragments. Phone calls, whispers, silence, more calls. By noon, Daniel had arranged an emergency meeting with the school. Heather's mother arrived, bringing more judgment than help. I returned to my house, closing the door behind me. The air was cooler, calmer. I poured myself another coffee and watched the mail truck make its next round, the driver waving like nothing had changed. In truth, everything had. On the counter, the blue notebook waited. I opened it and wrote a single line under today's date. The storm touched down. Then I smiled, not out of victory, but relief. Some lessons I thought have to be expensive before they're remembered. By Wednesday morning, the damage had begun to bloom. It started with an email flagged urgent from St. Mary's Academy, followed by a voicemail that landed like thunder in the quiet house. Heather had tried to log in to the Education Fund portal, resubmit the payment form, and reauthorize the tuition transfer using my name. She even uploaded a digital signature copied from a birthday card I once wrote to Ethan. What she did not realize was that the school's finance office used identity verification on all account activity after the freeze. The system flagged the document for fraud review and triggered a mandatory call to the listed owner. That call went straight to Daniel. I was outside watering the roses when I heard his voice through the open kitchen window, tense and clipped. "Yes, this is Daniel Drake. Sorry, could you repeat that?" His footsteps paced the floor. No, my mother did not approve that form. Wait, what signature? The silence that followed stretched long and brittle. When he hung up, he stayed still for several seconds before speaking again. "Heather, get in here." His voice carried the tone of a man realizing he had built his peace on borrowed ground. I stayed outside, pretending to trim leaves, though every word slid through the air like glass. Heather's voice rose in fragments. It was just a misunderstanding. I thought she said we could. Daniel interrupted sharper than I had ever heard him. "You forged her name. Do you have any idea what kind of trouble this could cause?" She tried to backpedal, her tone brittle. I was fixing the mess she made. He said nothing for a long moment. Then quieter, he said, "The only mess here is the one we made by thinking respect was optional." The door slammed. Inside, silence swallowed the rest. Around noon, the phone rang again, this time for me. The finance officer, polite and professional, wanted to confirm I was aware of the attempted submission. I confirmed I was and requested that all future communication be sent directly to me. She hesitated, then said, "Mrs. Drake, I must also inform you that we are required to notify the PTA Leadership Board since Mrs. Heather Drake is listed as the school's parental liaison." I thanked her for her diligence. The phrase sounded like music. By evening, the ripple had reached the PTA. Heather's name was temporarily suspended pending review. The news traveled fast through the small-town social web of Macon, whispered in grocery aisles and shared in polite disbelief. By Thursday morning, her phone buzzed nonstop with unread messages. She stopped posting online. The woman who once curated her life like a brand had gone silent. That afternoon, Daniel stopped by my porch. He looked older, shoulders slumped under invisible weight. "Mom," he said, "I don't know what to say anymore." I poured him a glass of water and handed it to him. Sometimes saying nothing is the right start. He sat down, staring at his hands. "She messed up, I know that. But everything feels broken now." I looked out at the yard where Grace and Ethan were chasing butterflies, their laughter cutting through the heaviness. Broken things can still teach Daniel. It depends on who's willing to learn. He nodded, eyes tired. As he stood to leave, Ethan ran up the steps, cheeks flushed. "Grandma, did I do something bad?" My heart caught at the tremble in his voice. I bent down, brushing a curl from his forehead. "No, honey. Adults sometimes need lessons, too." He nodded slowly, his eyes big and searching. Then he smiled, small but real, before running back to his sister. I watched him go, the innocence of children, both a mirror and a wound. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Across the yard, Heather's house was dark except for a single light in the kitchen. I could see her silhouette moving slowly, phone pressed to her ear, her posture tense. Maybe she was explaining. Maybe she was apologizing. Or maybe she was realizing that when you build your comfort on someone else's silence, the collapse comes quietly but completely. The night air smelled of honeysuckle and distant rain. Somewhere, a church bell chimed 8. I opened my blue notebook and wrote a single line, "Consequence received." The words looked small but satisfying. The quiet around me felt alive again, not as armor but as peace, earned through endurance. 1 week passed in the kind of calm that makes people nervous. The weather turned cool for late May, a thin drizzle softening the air. The neighborhood had returned to its usual rhythm, though whispers still clung to the edges of conversations, like pollen that refused to settle. I spent most mornings in the garden trimming hydrangeas, letting the quiet hum of bees fill the space that used to ache. The roses had started to bloom again, pale pink and deliberate. That Thursday, the gate creaked open. I looked up to see Heather standing there clutching a bouquet of lilies wrapped in gold paper, the kind that looked more expensive than sincere. She hesitated at the edge of the path, as if waiting for permission to approach. Her face was different, not in structure, but in tone. The usual polish was gone. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, her mascara smudged at the corners, and her lipstick cracked like old paint. Her smile tried to hold, but failed at the edges. "Hi, Eleanor," she said softly, her voice brittle. "Can we talk?" I wiped my hands on a towel and nodded toward the porch. She followed her heels, sinking slightly into the damp ground. When we sat, she placed the flowers between us. "I brought these for you. They are lilies, your favorite, right?" I glanced at them. "Frank used to bring me lilies on anniversaries," I said quietly. She shifted uncomfortable. "I know I messed up. The school thing, the PDA, everything. I overreacted and I was wrong." She looked down, twisting her fingers around the edge of her coat. I was hoping we could start over. I let the silence stretch. The sound of rain ticking on the roof filled the space between her words. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm but clear. "We already did, dear. This is the new start. You on your own." She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair, hands folded loosely in my lap. "You wanted independence control authority. Now you have it. You wanted to manage the family without interference. Congratulations. You are free to do exactly that." Her lips parted, trembling slightly. "Eleanor, please, this isn't what I meant. I just want things to be normal again." I smiled gently. Normal for whom? The rain grew steadier, small rivers running down the porch steps. She reached for the flowers as if holding them tighter might fix something. Her voice cracked. "Do you really hate me that much?" "Hate," I repeated, slowly tasting the word. "No, Heather. Hate takes energy. I have peace now, and that costs less." She looked away, blinking hard. The mascara smudged further gray streaks tracing down her cheeks. I could see the exhaustion sitting heavy in her shoulders the way guilt reshapes posture. "Daniel's been quiet," she murmured. "He blames me for everything. He says you were right." I didn't answer. She looked up, searching my face for softness. "Can't you just forgive me? We're family." I took a slow breath. Family isn't immunity, Heather. It's accountability with a last name. You taught me that. Her lower lip quivered. I watched her wipe her eyes, smearing the last of her foundation. The woman who once measured her worth in perfection now sat crumbling under the weight of consequence. I almost pitied her, but pity is just another form of indulgence. She stood slowly clutching the bouquet like a shield. "I guess I deserve that," she said. I nodded. "Most lessons worth learning are the expensive kind." She hesitated one more moment before turning to leave. As she reached the gate, I said softly, "Heather." She stopped, but did not turn. "You can leave the lilies." She set them down gently on the step and walked away, her posture small against the gray sky. When the gate clicked shut, I exhaled, feeling the tension unspool from my chest. The smell of lilies filled the air, sharp and sweet. I carried them inside and placed them in a vase by the window. Their white petals glowed faintly against the light, too clean, too pure, almost defiant. By evening, I noticed one had already begun to wilt. A thin brown line traced the edge of its bloom, quiet but inevitable. I poured myself tea, the steam curling up like forgiveness withheld. Through the window, I could see Heather's car pulling into her driveway, Daniel stepping out to help her carry something. For a moment, our eyes met across the narrow stretch of yard. She looked away first. The porch light reflected against the wet ground, catching on her face, just enough for me to see it clearly. The cracked lipstick, the ruined mascara, the faint tremor in her smile. Broken. Not destroyed, just broken enough to understand. I sipped my tea and whispered into the fading rain lessons when learned right don't need to be repeated. By the next week, the story had traveled further than any of us expected. Macon was a small town with a long memory and an appetite for gossip dressed as concern. The news of Heather's forged authorization made its rounds through church coffee hours, grocery store aisles, and the hum of the local salon. The school board confirmed the issue, quietly sending out an internal memo that eventually leaked through someone's cousin, whose sister worked part-time in the finance office. By Friday, Heather's name was officially listed as suspended from all PTA activities pending review. The phrasing was formal, polite, and devastating. At Sunday service, heads turned subtly when she entered with Daniel and the children. Her smile, once polished to perfection, now looked like a costume she no longer fit. Afterward in the parking lot, people offered the kind of sympathy that sounds like curiosity. "We are praying for you, dear. Everyone makes mistakes." Her responses were tight and short. "Thank you, we are fine." Daniel said little, his face pale under the early summer sun. I stood near the church steps, speaking with Mrs. Holland about her garden, pretending not to notice the glances. But I could feel the quiet reordering of judgment that happens when truth finally earns its voice. Later that day, Daniel came by. He stood in the doorway of my kitchen like a man rehearsing humility. "Mom," he began, "I owe you an apology." For a long time, I let Heather's version of normal replace what I knew was right. I thought keeping the peace meant protecting the family. He looked down his fingers, twisting the edge of his cap. "You didn't deserve any of it." I poured him a cup of coffee, setting it in front of him before I answered. "Just remember this silence, Daniel. It's expensive." He looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" I took a sip from my own cup. The kind of silence that follows disrespect isn't peace, it's the bill coming due. He nodded slowly, understanding blooming like shame. When he left, he hugged me for the first time in months. The embrace was awkward but real, the kind that carries apology without needing words. Across the fence, Heather's voice echoed faintly, scolding the children to bring their shoes inside. I could hear the weariness in it, the hollow sound of control cracking. A few days later, I saw Ethan waiting by the bus stop in a new uniform, this one from the local public school. No crest, no expensive shoes, no bragging. Just a simple blue polo and a backpack too big for his shoulders. He waved when he saw me smiling in that unguarded way children do when they've already forgiven what adults are still learning. After school, he ran across the yard, bursting through my gate with his usual energy. "Grandma, guess what? I made 2 new friends, and my teacher says I read really fast." His joy was pure, not the kind polished for pictures. I smiled and handed him a cookie. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Do you like your new school?" He nodded eagerly. "It's fun. Everyone's nice, and we don't have to be perfect all the time." That sentence caught me off guard. I watched him nibble, his cookie crumbs falling on his shirt, utterly unconcerned. "That's good," I said softly. "Perfect is boring anyway." That evening, I saw Daniel mowing the lawn, a simple act that somehow looked heavier than usual. Heather watched from the porch, arms folded, her face distant. The golden hour light caught her expression, softening what bitterness remained. For a moment, I almost saw the woman she could have been if pride hadn't chosen her vocabulary. But then she turned, her jaw tightening again, and the image vanished. The next Sunday, Ethan asked if he could sit with me during church. He held my hand during the hymn, his small fingers warm against mine. When the choir sang, I noticed Heather glancing back once or twice, eyes, tired, mouth pressed thin. After service, she approached me outside. Her voice was measured, careful. "He likes being with you," she said. I smiled faintly. "That's because I let him be himself." She nodded, understanding the message under the words. As she walked away, the faint scent of lilies lingered, fading quickly into the summer air. Weeks passed, and the gossip began to dull, replaced by newer dramas. The PTA found a new treasurer, the school year moved on, and the town found something else to whisper about. But every so often I would catch a neighbor's look, a small nod of acknowledgement that said they remembered what had happened. Not in mockery, but in quiet respect. Life resumed its rhythm. The mornings returned to their calm routines. I watered my garden, brewed my coffee, and helped Grace with her reading when she came by after school. Sometimes Daniel joined for dinner, sometimes not. Heather remained polite but distant, her greeting stripped of the condescension they once carried. Peace had returned, but not the fragile kind held together by fear of conflict. This peace had roots. One afternoon while I was sitting on the porch, Ethan ran up with a small drawing he had made. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a big yellow sun. "Me, Mommy, and Grandma," he said proudly. I smiled, my chest tightening with quiet relief. Maybe the world had not fixed itself, but something inside it had shifted for the better. When he ran back home, I looked at the drawing again and whispered, "Some storms clean more than they destroy." Dawn arrived like forgiveness, slow and golden. The first light touched the edge of the curtains, spilling warmth across the kitchen table, where a half-finished cup of tea waited beside a folded piece of stationery. I sat in my robe pen in hand, the smell of chamomile, mingling with the faint scent of rain that lingered from the night before. The house was quiet, except for the creak of wood settling and the ticking of the wall clock. Outside, the garden shimmered with dew, every leaf holding its own little universe of light. I unfolded the paper and began to write. "Dear Frank, it's been 7 years, and some days still feel like you just stepped out to fix the porch light. I imagine you shaking your head at how much we let little things pile up before we notice the weight. I wanted to tell you that I kept my promise. I taught them respect, not with anger, but with consequence. It wasn't easy. There were moments when silence felt like cowardice and patience felt like pain. But I remembered what you used to say when life tested us. Real strength doesn't rush. It waits until the noise dies down so truth can be heard. You would have smiled at that barbecue, I think. You would have seen it coming before anyone else did." I paused the pen, hovering over the paper, watching a sunbeam stretch across the table and rest on my wedding ring. The metal caught the light, and for a moment it looked alive again. I continued. "Daniel is changing. He's quieter now, less sure of himself, but more present. He brings Ethan by almost every afternoon sometimes, with Grace, sometimes alone. I think he's learning that apologies are not words, but consistency. Heather, too, has softened. Not much, but enough to notice. She smiles less for the camera and more when no one's watching. Maybe humility was always there, just buried under too much gloss. I closed my eyes and listened to the house breathing. The air felt lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding it together alone. I finished the letter, folded it neatly, and placed it beside your photo on the mantel. The frame gleamed faintly in the sun, your face calm as if approving. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea, steam rising in slow spirals. The light danced across the surface, soft and forgiving. As I sat, I heard the familiar sound of small footsteps running across the porch. The door opened and Ethan's voice filled the air, bright as birdsong. "Grandma." He ran in holding up a piece of paper covered in colorful stars. "Teacher says I'm the kindest in class." He grinned, missing tooth and all. My heart lifted. I set down my cup and pulled him close. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Kindness will take you further than any fancy school ever could." He nodded solemnly as if filing that thought away for later. "Can I have one of your cookies now?" I laughed. "Of course you can." He ran to the jar on the counter, the one Frank used to pretend was his secret stash. I watched him reach for it, his small hands careful but determined. In that moment, everything felt complete. The house no longer echoed with loneliness, but with purpose. Ethan sat at the table munching loudly, crumbs scattering like confetti. He looked up suddenly. "Grandma, did you win?" I tilted my head. "Win what?" "The fight with Mommy." His eyes were wide honest. I smiled and reached over to wipe a crumb from his chin. "No, darling. There are no winners in families, only learners." He thought about it for a moment, then nodded as if that made perfect sense. When he was done, he kissed my cheek and ran outside to play. I sat back, watching the sunlight grow stronger, filling every corner of the kitchen. The tea had cooled, but it still tasted like calm. I picked up my notebook and wrote one last line under the date. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through change. The months that followed unfolded in quiet, deliberate order. The chaos that had once shadowed the house had thinned, replaced by something steadier, something resembling grace. Daniel had changed first. It wasn't dramatic, just consistent. One morning, he told me he had taken a new position at the county office, a job that came with fewer bonuses but steadier hours. He said he wanted to be home for dinner, to walk Ethan to the bus stop, to learn how to live without rushing toward things that didn't matter. I watched him sign the tuition check himself that week, hands trembling a little but proud. When he handed it to me, I didn't say much, just nodded a small gesture that meant more than approval. He looked relieved, as if the act itself was a confession accepted. The following Sunday, he arrived with groceries, the same kind I used to bring when I lived on careful budgets. He unpacked them neatly one by one and smiled. "It feels good to do this," he said. "Feels right." Heather changed slower. At first, she avoided me completely. Her pride was a fragile thing, still bruised and aching. But one day I saw her walking back from town with a folder tucked under her arm, eyes red but calm. Later, Daniel mentioned that she had started therapy sessions with Dr. Monroe, the counselor from church. She went twice a week, he said, and came back quieter each time, as if she were finally learning the difference between silence and reflection. By autumn, the children had settled into their new school routine. Grace had joined a music club. Ethan played soccer in the park every Saturday, and their laughter carried across the yards like sunlight. Life had regained rhythm, and the house no longer felt heavy with unspoken things. One late afternoon in November, a small envelope arrived in the mail. It had no return address, only my name written in delicate handwriting. I recognized it instantly. I sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from my tea, and opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph of Ethan standing in his classroom, holding a drawing. The drawing showed two stick figures, one tall one, small, both smiling under a blue sky. On the back of the photo in Heather's handwriting were the words, "He's learning from you now." Beneath it was a small folded note. "Thank you," it said. "Not for the money, not for the lessons, for the mirror." I set the letter down carefully, my throat tight. There was no apology, no plea, just acknowledgement, and that I realized was enough. Sometimes redemption doesn't come with words or ceremonies. It comes quietly through effort repeated until it becomes truth. I placed the photo on the mantel beside Frank's picture. For a moment, I imagined him there, smiling his quiet smile, the kind that always said he already knew how the story would end. The evening light spilled through the window, painting the room in amber. The kettle whistled softly, a reminder that the world keeps its rhythm no matter who learns or forgets. I poured another cup of tea and stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled of wood smoke and distant rain. Across the street, I could see Heather and Daniel walking the children home from the park. Their movements were unhurried, their conversation calm. When they reached their porch, Heather glanced toward my house. Our eyes met across the distance. She raised a hand just slightly, a small wave. No performance, no audience. I returned it with a nod. Nothing more was needed. Inside the clock chimed 6. I turned on the porch light, the same one Frank had wired himself decades ago. It flickered once before glowing steady soft against the gathering dusk. I thought of all the lessons that had taken root in this house, not through lectures, but through patience, not through shouting, but through boundaries, drawn like quiet lines in sand. Respect had returned, not demanded but earned. Daniel's new steadiness, Heather's effort. The children's laughter echoing past old wounds. The family had changed shape, but not meaning. It was smaller now, simpler, more human. I went back inside, setting my cup on the counter. The photo caught the last glimmer of light, the colors soft but certain. I smiled. There was no need for forgiveness, no speech to seal the moment. Peace, I had learned, doesn't require witnesses. It exists where lessons settle and hearts unclench. The night came gently, as if reluctant to interrupt. I stood at the window watching the streetlights blink awake one by one. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime stirred its notes faint and clear. I whispered softly to the empty room, more to the memory than to anyone living. We made it frank. Not perfect, but right. Then I turned off the lamp, the house humming with quiet certainty, and let the peace remain exactly as it was earned, unspoken and whole. The sun was sinking low, painting the porch in shades of gold and rose. The air was warm but gentle, carrying the faint hum of cicadas from the trees beyond the yard. Eleanor sat in her wicker chair, the same one Frank had bought at a flea market 20 years ago, the one that creaked like an old friend every time she leaned back. The cup of tea in her hand had gone cool, but she didn't mind. She wasn't drinking it for warmth anymore. She was drinking it for rhythm, for the small, quiet reminder that life at last had settled into a steady, honest beat. The neighborhood was peaceful that evening. Across the street, Daniel's porch light glowed faintly, a tiny mirror of her own. Through the open window, she could hear laughter, the kind of laughter that had been missing for years. Heather's voice joined softly, not sharp or performative, but low and real. The children were playing tag in the front yard, their feet slapping against the grass, the sound like music she had forgotten she loved. Ethan's bike leaned against her steps, its wheels still spinning from his last visit. He had left it there earlier that afternoon, running inside to show her a perfect score on his spelling test. His handwriting, uneven but proud, still lay open on the table beside her. She traced the letters gently with her fingertips, her chest filling with something quieter than joy, but deeper than satisfaction. It was peace. And peace, she realized, had its own texture. It didn't rush. It didn't demand. It simply existed once everything false had burned away. She took a slow breath and looked toward the horizon where the last line of light met the outline of the trees. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like completion. She thought of all the words she had once wanted to say, the defenses, the pleas, the explanations, and how useless they seemed now. No one needed convincing. The truth had already done its work. Peace didn't come when they apologized, she whispered to herself. It came when I stopped asking for it. The line hung in the air, soft but steady like something sacred. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that comes from deep understanding, not victory, the kind that stays. She looked down at the cup, now half empty, and caught the glint of sunlight in the reflection of the tea. The light trembled gently across the surface, shimmering as if the past itself was waving goodbye. In that reflection, she saw the years, the exhaustion, the humiliation, the slow rebuild, and then saw herself now still standing, still calm. That was the quiet triumph no one could take from her. A creak on the porch made her look up. Ethan had come back, riding his bike slowly up the driveway, his hair catching the last streak of orange sunlight. "Grandma, look." No hands. He laughed as he wobbled past her, balancing awkwardly, one knee scraped, but proud. She laughed too, clapping lightly. "That's my brave boy," she said. "Just remember, balance first, show off later." He grinned, circling back to her chair. "Can I stay here a while? Your house smells nice." She smiled, brushing a stray leaf from his shoulder. "Of course, darling. The house always has room for peace and cookies." He leaned the bike against the railing and climbed the steps, settling beside her with the ease of someone who knew he belonged. Together, they sat in silence, watching the sky melt from gold to deep violet. The street lamps blinked awake one by one, and somewhere far off a church bell marked 7 o'clock. The world moved gently, and for once, no one was rushing to catch it. Ethan leaned his head against her arm. "Grandma, are you happy now?" She looked down at him, at those wide, honest eyes that carried no trace of the noise adults make out of pride. Yes, she said softly. Happy doesn't mean loud, sweetheart, it just means still. He nodded as if he understood, though maybe he wouldn't until he was much older. Still, he smiled a real, open, unguarded smile that reached all the way to his eyes. That was enough. After a while, he got up, brushed off his jeans, and hopped back onto his bike. I'll race the streetlights home, he said, pedaling off into the purple dusk, his laughter trailing behind him like a song. Eleanor watched until he disappeared around the corner, her heart full but unburdened. She turned back toward the house, letting the porch light flicker on. Inside, the clock ticked in its steady rhythm, the one Frank had fixed years ago when the world still felt endless. She took one last sip of tea and placed the cup beside the window, the glass catching her reflection, older, wiser, and finally free. The wind rustled the curtains, carrying in the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. It brushed against her cheek like a whisper from something eternal, something that had always known she'd find her way here. She breathed in deeply, letting that peace settle inside her bones, and smiled again, quiet and certain. The story wasn't about victory or punishment. It was about balance restored, dignity, reclaimed love, redefined. As the stars began to appear one by one, Eleanor whispered a final thought, not to Frank, not to anyone living, but to whoever might someday need to hear it. The strongest justice isn't loud, it's lived. She reached for the porch light switch, dimming it until the world softened to dark. And before the screen faded to black, her voice lingered gentle, resolute, and unshakably human. Has anyone ever called your kindness free? Tell me how you drew your line and subscribe for more quiet justice stories like Eleanor's.